Most Diablo build guides focus solely on the endgame builds for Magic Find, PvP, etc., often ignoring the player's first steps into Diablo 2. So today, in preparation for Diablo 2 Resurrected, we're going to look at something different, starter builds for each class that will help you work your way through normal into Nightmare with only the items you find along the way. These builds assume that you're playing in Resurrected or version 1.13 or later of base Diablo 2, which means you have access to respecs for changing your build as you move into Nightmare or Hell. If you're interested in seeing more in-depth videos on an individual build mentioned, comment below about which one, or if you're watching this soon after release, I've dropped a public poll as well for 5 of the 7 classes, and if there's interest in the normal builds, we'll continue to move through all 7 classes eventually, based on the results of the poll. Number 7. The Barbarian is easily the meatiest of the starting classes in Diablo 2, but sadly also one of the slowest to get started since he is extremely equipment dependent. The most popular build for the starter Barbarian is the Double Swing Barbarian, usually progressing into using Frenzy if you want to stick with the dual weapon method. Obviously, as a Barbarian you will want to choose a weapon mastery. While Axe or Sword are viable and can do similar tricks, Mace is far more popular option due to the attack speeds and weapon options, since you can choose to use random scepters in Act 1, and then either sticking with scepters or moving on to flails in Act 2 depending on your weapon choice. The skill points should be mostly in your weapon mastery and picking up 1 point in a number of support skills. As far as equipment, the preferred method is to farm the Countess in Act 1, since she has an increased chance to drop runes you want. The most important ones being Tal, Ith, El, and Eth. The others being okay, but these will be kind of what you want for equipment. The main weapons of choice on the Double Swing Barbarian are going to be the Malice Flail, made with Ith, El, and Eth, and a flail purchased from Act 2, and a 3 Tal rune flail as well. Don't worry, you'll get a lot of Tals from the Countess. If uncomfortable with Malice's life drain though, you can make a steel weapon instead with a 2-socket flail, and the runes Tyr and El in that order. Armor-wise, Stealth is the most popular option, made with Tal Eth in a 2-socket armor, and most of the rest of your equipment slots are fairly flexible, mostly wanting to favor Resist to make yourself more sturdy. As you get into the later acts of Normal, other rune words can open up, but they are fairly uncommon, requiring runes you generally won't find in significant quantities until Nightmare or later. Number 6. The Amazon has access to a few options that work in normal difficulty in Diablo 2, though I generally prefer the Poison and Plague Javelin versions for normal, moving into Lightning for Nightmare. While our Poison Javelins become mediocre in Nightmare and Hell difficulty, without high-end gear at least, in normal they are strong enough to let you move through the game with little or no resistance, even on higher player counts. She's also a lot more friendly to the lack of gear than the bow counterpart, since the only farming really worthwhile on her is for stealth armor early, and maybe an Ancient's Pledge shield later after you get access to Ral or Tal, and a 3-socket kite shield, which you can get by about Act 2. You can also craft up to an Ort rune if you want to do a lot of farming, or you can wait until Act 5 where you get one for free, guaranteed by doing quests. Or, if you're lucky, in the later acts you can actually even make a lore if you get an Ort and a soul and a 2-socket helm, which yes, can be made in Barbarian helmets. As far as the rest of his or her gear, as usual, resists are nice, though if you can shop a replenishing javelin, life will be orders of magnitude easier. Otherwise, you just keep a few stacks of javelins floating around as you find them. Even normal javelins work, or purchase plain ones from merchants if you accidentally break some. Number 5. The Necromancer, despite being easily my favorite class, is weirdly one of the more meh characters to go through normal with. There are some fun, quirky builds with poison or summons that you can actually go with, but generally the recommended normal build is going to just be your standard Bone Necromancer, starting out with Teeth, moving to Bone Spear and Bone Wall, along with usually getting at least the basic 1 point in Clay Golem Mastery and Summon Resist along the way. It's a mana chugger as well, but like with the Amazon, it's very resource light. Though with this one, getting faster casts and bigger belts for the mana potions you need are a bit more important than, say, resists. As far as armor, Stealth is a bit more important for this character, but that's really all you need to grind for, just a Tal and an Eth and a 2-socket armor, which is really easy to do off the Countess. Though if you're finding issues with mana, farming for a few Tyr runes as well can help alleviate that because they give you 2 mana per kill. And shopping an OK wand will help out a bit as well with faster cast and, well, mana resources, because mana is a common affix on those. Corpse Explosion is also nice for leveling up a few areas as you prepare for Nightmare difficulty, and even Hell difficulty. One nice thing about this build that it has over other starter builds is you don't need to waste a respec on it, since it stacks up nicely as you go. Number 4. The Paladin's journey through normal in Diablo 2 is a bit interesting. While there are a lot of options, one of the best options is a build that oddly enough has very little to do with their late game builds, and that is the Holy Fire Paladin. Super simple to set up, the Holy Fire Paladin is just getting Zeal early, and then dumping every point you have into Holy Fire and its synergy, Fire Resist. This giving you hundreds of points of damage, which is more than enough to get through normal. The normal difficulty weapon choices for this build are the same as the Barbarian, often favoring Malice or Steel, or in a pinch, a Triple Tal Flail. Some people go 1 point in Zeal and put the spare points in Fire Resist. I sometimes get a couple points in Zeal just for more swings to save a little bit of mana, but either way is fine. The build tears its way through normal fairly easy, and the playstyle is pretty simple in the transition to Nightmare, where you can skill reset and go with more traditional Fanaticism Zealots, along with access to better rune word options. It is fairly important to get a fast weapon with this, is the only kind of caveat that I'd put on that, if you go for like a higher Zeal swing especially, so you're not stuck in place too long and getting pounded by ranged enemies. Number 3, the Sorceress. While the fastest to move through normal, it is a bit harder for new players. There's pretty much just 2 strategies that work in normal, the Charge Bolt and Nova Sorceress, and the Fire Bolt into Fireball Sorceress. I personally prefer the latter because I love the Rune Word Leaf, and it's super easy to get from Countess runs thanks to only using a Tear and a Rawl, which she drops fairly regularly. That said, you do lose a shield with this, so there is a bit of a trade-off. As far as points, you usually just invest in your level 1 skill of choice early on, which is, like I said, Charge Bolt or Fire Bolt, as well as a point in Warmth, and then as you progress, you'll start investing a point into Static Field for bosses, Teleport for mobility, and your synergies. The Charge Bolt Nova Sorceress is a lot more mana hungry, but deals with crowds better, whereas the Fire Bolt Fireball Sorceress is much better mana control, and extra plus skills from the staff makes her kind of decent damage against bosses as well, and a lot faster in my hands than the Charge Boltress. Number 2, the Assassin has a few options going for her through normal in Diablo 2. Kicks are fun if you're into melee, but you can also do a lot with traps early on. They're especially good at dealing with larger groups of enemies, the most popular version for normal difficulty being the Wake of Fire Trap Assassin, which is boosted by Leaf. Just like the Sorcerer's fire skills, it is a fire skill as well, so it's easy to get up to a reasonable base level with synergies, and thanks to Burst of Speed, you also have a lot of mobility early on, while it also boosts your trap laying speed as well. This will be a mana-hungry build, kind of like the Necromancer and Sorceress, but it's fairly fun to run and fairly easy to use with enough mana potions. While Wake of Inferno is a synergy for this, I'd recommend against using it since Inferno damage is bad due to how it works and some bugs with it. The only use of it is pretty much when you're unable to get a clear ground path to the target. You will also need a non-fire damage source later on to beat normal without some tricks, but you could also just invest a point into Dragon Talon and just kind of go with that with a fast weapon on your offhand. But for most of the difficulty, it is fine, and the fire immune you meet can be beaten with normal weapons, a mercenary, or even a shadow if you're high enough level at that point to have a shadow. So it's not a huge deal in normal, but in Nightmare you will be swapping over to lightning eventually. Number 1, the Druid. Like the other classes, there's a lot of paths to victory for this furry guy in Diablo 2, especially whenever you're just talking normal difficulty. Though as you may have noticed from some of the previous characters, I love my Leaf Staff, so Fire is the path I recommend here as well. Elemental Tree using Firestorm, then evolving into Molten Boulder and Fissure. Will actually get you a decent way through Nightmare even if you are willing to over-invest in it before having to swap to something more efficient. Stealth is a bit more important to the Druid than it is for the Assassin, because he sadly doesn't have any real speed tools in human form, though if you feel you need a little bit of support from meat shields, a single point running down the summon tree can kind of get you some decent barriers to enemies, especially as you get closer to 30 and can have that bear tank, since even 1 point in the bear is more than enough through normal, so you don't have to worry about that, and you'll also get a free, well, not a free point, but a point in a spirit along the way that can be useful here and there. Hopefully this gave you some basic starter ideas for whatever class looked the most fun to you, and if you'd like to see a low-level guide for any of these in normal difficulty, be sure to mention it down below or in the linked poll, since we'll be starting the guide series soon, along with some other things that I have on the back burner.